Hello, David here from the Functional Movement Training Centre. What I want to demonstrate here is the importance of the posterior kinetic chain. A lot of workplace health and safety guidelines talk about maintaining a straight back, and often that's a misunderstood concept. Number one, we shouldn't really be talking about a straight back, we should be talking about a neutral spine. The neutral position is only one component of healthy moving. The other component that's very often overlooked and misunderstood is activation of the posterior kinetic chain. Now, the posterior kinetic chain is a system of muscles, tendons and ligaments that runs from the sole of our foot all the way up the back of our body and right to the top of our head. So I'm going to demonstrate that very simply with an elastic rubber band that represents the musculoligamental structures of the posterior kinetic chain. And then I'm going to do some movements that highlight activation of the posterior kinetic chain with proficient movement, and then deactivation of the posterior kinetic chain with movement dysfunction. I'm going to represent the posterior kinetic chain with this elastic band. And if I perform the movement with good movement proficiency, you will see activation of that posterior kinetic chain with the tension that's developed in it. And if I carry out all my activities of daily living with that movement proficiency, I'm taking every opportunity to condition the posterior kinetic chain, which then flows on to maintaining spine health indefinitely. Just have a look at the tension that develops on that posterior kinetic chain when I put it in this position. If I do a sound proficient movement, which is what we refer to as a hip hinge, and I've got to pick up an object, and you can see the tension that's developing in my posterior kinetic chain, and I pick up the object. And again, I'll now demonstrate that movement slightly rotated so that you can see clearly from a posterior view. And again. And I can feel the tension in that elastic band, and the same thing is happening internally. My posterior kinetic chain is being active, and that activity is driving the health and condition of the posterior kinetic chain, which is a very important structure that maintains the health of your spine. The spine lives in the posterior half of your body, and the posterior kinetic chain is supporting that spine at all times. Now, if the object is at a lower position on the ground and I'm going to move proficiently, I will drop into a squat. As long as that squat is within my range of proficient movement, which it is, I can then pick up the object quite safely with posterior chain activation, neutral spine position, hip centric rotation. I'll demonstrate again. And at all times I can feel the tension in that elastic band. Now, I'm now going to demonstrate those movements again with poor movement proficiency. You should be able to see the elastic band become more lax and become essentially deactivated, which means that every time I'm bending, I'm missing out on an opportunity to condition my posterior kinetic chain, which means I'm developing a weaker, more fragile spine. So here we go. If I bend poorly, I can immediately feel the relaxation in that posterior kinetic chain. Okay? Even though I've maintained a fairly neutral spine in this movement, I can feel there's much less tension in that posterior kinetic chain. The deactivation will be more prominent if the object and range of motion required is greater. For example, if the object is on the floor. So now I'm going to move the way that workplace health and safety guidelines would recommend that we move, maintaining a straight back when they actually mean neutral. So I'm going to do that, and I can immediately feel complete deactivation of the posterior chain. I can pick up the object, I've still maintained a straight or neutral spine during this movement, but what I haven't maintained is activation of the posterior kinetic chain. I can feel that. Hopefully you'll be able to see that in the lack of tension that's in this rubber band, which is simulating my posterior kinetic chain. I'll do that again. So here I am, moving poorly, deactivating the posterior kinetic chain. It's quite loose. There's no tension developing in it. Where I can feel the tension is in the tips of my toes and in my knees. I'm loading and balancing up on my toes and knees, and there is no activity or activation of that posterior musculoligamentous chain there. I hope that demonstration clearly explains to you the importance of proficient movement, not just with a straight or neutral back and hip-centric rotation, but also with posterior kinetic chain activation. That posterior kinetic chain is a very important structure that maintains the health, stability and robustness of our spine to avoid injury and stay healthy and pain-free for your whole life. Thanks very much.